Okay, all right. I think it has started to record. Excellent. So, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for taking time to attend the second session of the Hispanic Serving Institutions Division Evaluation and Evidence Series webinars, Data and Measurements for Your HSI Projects. My name is Margarita L. Melendez Gotay, and I serve as the program lead for the POHA and EAI programs, as well as a program specialist for the STEM program and the DHSI program, and as the division liaison for our Puerto Rico grantees. I would like to extend a special thank you to our colleagues, Dr. Jason Cottrell and Josue de la Rosa, whom we will be hearing from today, for their kindness and generosity in extending to us their experience and expertise in the fields of data management and evaluation. A special note of appreciation to my supervisor and the director of the HSI division, Dr. Stacy Sliepsvich, and thank you also to all of my wonderful HSI division colleagues. However, most importantly, thank you to all of you for your tireless devotion on behalf of your students, as well as for your IHEs, your fellow faculty and staff, and the commitment to the communities that you serve. So a few words before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube playlist. And yes, we will provide copies of the PowerPoints. So please do not worry. We will send them out via G5 broadcast and Outlook to all of today's attendees. So as we mentioned during the inaugural webinar of our Evaluation and Evidence series in February, during the 2023 Project Directors meeting, we held a number of special sessions on evaluation, including a session entitled Reflections on 20 plus years of evaluation and building evidence for Title III and Title V projects. We heard at that time from many of our project evaluators and project directors, as well as from Dr. Matthew Soldner, the current acting IES director and the department's chief evaluation officer, as well as from one of our presenters today, Josue de la Rosa, the director of annual report and information from the National Center for Education Statistics, or NCES. There was a very strong interest in continuing this conversation on all issues, evaluation and evidence related, hence this evaluation and evidence series, of which today's webinar is the second installment. So today's topic, as I mentioned before, and as you've all seen on the flyer, is specifically data and measurements for your HSI projects. And this webinar will attempt to address the diversity of requirements for all of the projects that our division manages, which includes our Hispanic programs, our three biggest programs. So we're talking about the DHSI program, the HSI STEM and Articulation program, and the POHA program, as well as our 5 FIPSI programs. And those are the open textbooks, the basic needs, the rural post-secondary, the model and simulation, and the transitioning gang involved youth program. Specifically, the topics for today's webinar will be the following. So IPEDS, HSI tabulation, and other NCES data, and IES data tools. Josh will be talking to us mostly about those topics. And then HSI eligibility data, performance measures, outcome data, and reporting from Jason, and data quality issues will be touched on by both Joshua and Jason during today's webinar. So presenting first our distinguished panel. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with Jason already. So Dr. Cottrell, he is the lead research analyst for OPE, a proud first-generation graduate of VCU. He has received a number of awards from ACPA, and in addition to his work with data specifically, which is the subject of today's webinar, he is also the lead for reporting within OPE. I do hear some background noise, so if someone could please mute themselves. I continue to hear background noise. I don't remember immediately how to mute everyone, so if one of my colleagues could help with that, I would very much appreciate it. Thank you. And then moving on then to Josh or Josue de la Rosa. Josue is the Director of Annual Reports and Information in NCES. He oversees the HSI tabulation and is very involved in making NCES data more accessible to parents, educators, policymakers, researchers, and the public. So we are very, very lucky today to have two of the best experts in the Department of Education on data and measurements presenting to us today. So now that I've talked a little bit about what we're going to be talking about in the webinar and our panelists, I'm going to very, very briefly, within 2 or 3 minutes, just remind everyone about what our evidence standards and our evaluation requirements are for our programs and how they relate to data and measurements, which is the subject of today's webinar. So reminding everyone that for the majority of our programs, we are going to have a combination of entry requirements for demonstrates a rationale, which is the same as developing a logic model, and including promising evidence studies within your project design. So the language from one of our most recent selection criteria, quality of the project design, it requires you to develop a logic model, demonstrates a rationale. We use those terms interchangeably. And it requires you to complete an evidence form where you list the study or the research or the studies or the evaluation and research papers on which you are developing your project design. That last bullet that you'll see there are some resources for logic models that we are trying to flag for you. Those first 2 videos are part of our YouTube playlist. The first 2 installments of webinars that we've done specifically on logic models, plus an additional video from the Office of Special Education Programs, and then some resources from the regional educational laboratories, which are part of IES. This is basically here for your reference. These are the evidence definitions that are used in our Titles 3 and 5 programs. And we do encourage all of you to review the complete definitions cited in 34 CFR Part 77. So as I transition into the evaluation requirements, one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we highlight for you today and that we are emphasizing here is that at the time of application for all of you, in developing your logic models, in scouring available resources for promising evidence on which you build your design, you had to have a good grasp of your available data and the data that you seek to produce through your projects as you implement your grants according to your logic model and your evaluation plan. I'm trying to tie all of this back together to the data and measurements information that we are going to hear about today. Moving on then to the evaluation requirements, which have an even bigger chunk related to the data piece. The most recent language from a selection of our NIA's notices and binding applications have presented an evaluation plan as what you see on the screen here. So we require that you enumerate your data elements and your data collection procedures. We require that you provide specific on the data analysis procedures that you're going to use in your projects, and that you describe how those data analysis procedures will produce formative and summative results. We know that formative and summative results are related to quantitative and qualitative data. And for some of our newer NIAs, we've also added an additional evaluation requirement that says that your methods of evaluation will be able to speak to the impact of your project's effectiveness by meeting the promising evidence standard. And again, you can go back to the previous slide where we have the definition on what meets the promising evidence standard. And then we have put out this invitation to all of our grantees, many of whom have older projects funded under 2021, 19, whatever. And so for you, some of the criteria you may see in your evaluation plan would be one or a combination of these. So making sure that your evaluation methods are thorough, feasible, and appropriate to your goals and objectives, making sure that your performance measures are related to your goals and objectives, and that they're going to produce quantitative and qualitative data, as well as making sure that your goals, objectives, and outcomes are specified and are measurable. We're going to be talking a lot today about performance outcomes, as well as about the measurability of your performance measures and the outcomes associated to your objectives. So again, all of this is just provided as context, a launching pad for the specific data topics that we're about to talk about. So here we have everybody's contact information. When you get the slide deck, you'll see the hyperlinks. You can go to our YouTube playlist as well as to our division webpage, and we invite you to join us for the next webinar of this series next Thursday at 2 p.m. and the link is here. I saw some activity in the chat regarding the PowerPoints. Again, as I said at the beginning, everyone will receive a copy of the PowerPoint, and this presentation is being recorded. So if you have to leave early, you'll be able to go onto our YouTube and you will be able to watch it. Again, reminding everyone that you should be on mute. If you have any questions, please raise your hand using the Teams function. You can also put your questions in the chat and we will stop periodically to address them. Are there any issues or questions that I need to address before I hand this over to Jason for his presentation? Okay, all right. So I'm going to go off camera and stop presenting, and then Jason will begin his portion of the webinar. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Margarita. I'm going to switch over to my slide deck view. And Margarita, I sent you an email just a second ago, just an FYI. My meeting got canceled, so I'm here for the whole time. And just to confirm, if I can get a thumbs up that you see my slides.
I can see it.
Perfect. So Margarita asked me to present on a couple different areas related to HSI programs, and really kind of generally our Titles 3 and 5 grant programs as well, because it's kind of overlapping in a lot of ways, the way that we work through both of those. And the eligibility and performance report data are things that are kind of unique to the department because they're institutional level data and they're kind of all encompassing. And so this presentation is kind of talking about the process, about eligibility going into the performance reports and kind of what we do with that information. And as Margarita mentioned, my name is Jason. I am the lead research analyst in the Institutional Program Development Division within the Office of Post-Secondary Education. So first off, HSI eligibility. And when we talk about HSI eligibility, the big thing is really the general Titles 3 and 5 eligibility first and foremost. And so,
Jason,
yes.
Forgive me. I'm getting a number of people saying that they're having a hard time hearing you. I can hear you perfectly well, but I don't know if there's any way for you perhaps to raise your volume.
I can.
Okay, people are now saying that it's better. I know we were
Okay.
having connectivity issues with the Ed network, so maybe it's been fixed. I'm sorry, sorry. Thank you.
No problem. Within eligibility, the first thing I want to talk about is the eligibility matrix. And so the eligibility matrix is something that we actually calculate annually to determine an institution's eligibility for Titles 3 and 5 grant programs. And we do the computation by first using IPEDS data that are provisionally released to us for the academic year immediately preceding the most recently completed academic year. And so for FY 2025, we'll be using data from the 2022-2023 academic year, which is the year preceding the most recently completed 23-24 year. The provisional data release occurred generally in the fall of the year, so it's anticipated that the eligibility matrix is computed and released in the December-January timeframe for us, and we typically close the eligibility period in February of that year. And so the eligibility process we expect this year to open at the very beginning of January and will probably close at the end of February, with us doing reviews for the waiver requirements in March of 2025 and releasing the final eligibility matrix in April. And so these data generate what we call a provisional eligibility matrix, and the criteria derived from the applicable legislation and regulations were applied to essentially the enrollment and the financial data that you submitted to IPEDS and the Federal Student Aid Office files, and we determine the eligibility for those programs first and foremost. Once we determine an institution's eligibility for Titles 3 and 5, we then move into the programmatic requirements, and I'll talk about that as well here in just a moment. So in order to determine your eligibility, you will first need to go in and check your eligibility in the HEPAS system. Most of you, because I believe that you all are all grantees, are familiar with it because that's where we do our annual performance reports. And you'll log into the system. If you don't already have access to the eligibility piece of the HEPAS system, you would just send an email over to the help desk and they'll be able to add that in. When you log in, you'll log in through login.gov, and you may already have an account that is connected to HEPAS, and so you'll follow that information again through the process, and you'll click on the eligibility information that's in there, and then click on View Pre-Eligibility Information. And again, you won't be able to do this until probably mid to late December or very beginning of January. If your institution meets the needy students and the core expenses requirements, you'll be able to print your letter by clicking the View Print Your Eligibility Letter button. If you aren't, then it'll direct you immediately to the application process, and you'll be able to complete the application for eligibility. So the next piece of this is, what is the definition of an HSI? And for us, within the department, an HSI is an institution that meets the eligibility requirements for Titles 3 and 5 grant programs. Additionally, at the time of the application, it has an enrollment of undergraduate students that is not less than 25% students who are Hispanic. So for eligibility, the two variables that we use to determine eligibility are the core expenses per FTE and the needy student requirements. Both of those are data that we receive from IPED. So the institution would submit those data to IPEDS for the year that we're using, which for us in this upcoming year, it'll be 2022-2023. And we'll use those data to determine whether an institution meets the threshold or not. And so for core expenses per FTE, you need to be below the threshold. So we're looking at institutions that are not spending a lot of money towards their FTE, and so they have low finances in relation to their full-time equivalency. And then for needy students, we're looking for institutions that are have high populations of needy students. And so we're looking specifically at institutions that have more than the median number for their similar institutions for their Pell Grant recipients. For their application, we're looking at institutions, since we don't have the specifics of these data, institutions that have awarded at least 50% of an institution's degree-seeking students need-based financial aid. And so that's going to be the federal Pell Grant, federal SEOG, and federal work-study programs. And so those are the first two pieces of data that we use for an institution's eligibility, and you have to meet both. If during the eligibility process you're not meeting either of those requirements, you would be able to submit an application first and then move into submitting a waiver request. So institutions are first deemed eligible through the pre-eligibility process. And if the institution has met those requirements based on IPEDS data, there's nothing else that the institution needs to do. It's strictly on downloading the letter during the eligibility process. If an institution isn't deemed eligible, then they would go into the they would apply through the process that's described in the annual notice inviting applications. And that NIA will essentially lay out the process. It hasn't changed in probably 8 years. And so the process is similar to the ones that have been done in the past. And the institution is going to submit that application by submitting data that's specifically requested. For institutions that aren't deemed eligible automatically through that application process, then they would be able to submit an exemption request or a waiver request to the department. And those waiver requests essentially say, it isn't reflected in our application that we have a high population of needy students, or our core expenses are adversely affected by the location that we're in. And so if an institution is in, say, Phoenix, Arizona, then the institution would, provide that information that the institution's spending a lot more funds for their heating and cooling expenses. And so in that case, it'd be the cooling expenses. And so we would accept that as a waiver request. Margarita.
Jason, we have a number of questions here in the chat related to information that you just shared.
Sure.
So, a couple of folks are asking about who on their campus would be able to actually see the eligibility data. And then we also had a question about several folks are interested in how the needy student component is calculated regarding graduate students.
Sure. So the first question is it depends. Institutions, different people on your campus will be the ones that are checking the status or submitting that. I recommend that you, if you don't already know, send an email to the help desk to see if they can let you know who the person is, or to ask them if you can be added as a contact. You have to have an email address that matches your institution. It has to be a .edu address, and we would go from there. For the needy students, we are strictly looking at, first and foremost, the Pell population. What is the percentage of students who are receiving Pell grants? Obviously, graduate students do not receive Pell, and so we would be looking strictly at the percentage of the Pell grants. If during the application process, that's a separate process, and there are specific calculations, that information is available in the application booklet. And so you can go in and take a look at how those are calculated. But graduate students are allowed to receive federal work study. And so they would be calculated in that process. And so the application is very different than the pre-eligibility and the IPEDS data that we use. The grant-specific requirements, so once an institution is deemed eligible based on the application or the waiver request or whatever it may be, that's when we will go in and take a look at the institution's demographics. And the institution's demographics will determine those grant-specific requirements. So in the case of HSI, we're looking specifically at the 25%. There is no waiver for that 25%. You can't be at 24.8% and ask for a waiver. It is at 25%. For HSI, HSI STEM, and the POHA programs, that's what we're looking at. For POHA, we also look at, does the institution offer a post-baccalaureate program? And so that's an additional requirement to determine whether or not they meet the definition of being eligible for POHA. And then as you see on your screen, there are some additional requirements for each of the programs that you would want to take a look at. And we actually list if an institution meets the definition of these programs. So you can be an HSI and also an ANAPESI, for example, even if you have a DHSI grant. And so keep those in mind. So for HSI eligibility, kind of an overview real quick, we determine program eligibility using the IPEDS data from the year preceding the most recently completed academic year, as I mentioned. An institution cannot waive the program requirements. It can only, waive the requirements for eligibility based on what the institution is situated in, what their circumstances are. An institution that meets both the eligibility requirements and the HSI requirements will be listed on the eligibility matrix. And then we get this question often, how do you determine the HSI undergraduate percentage? And that is using IPEDS data from the EF 20, whatever, in this case, it'll be the 2023 A file, and then the specific variable will be the EF HISPT variable, and we'll divide that over the total. And so here you'll see the eligibility threshold data that we've collected over the years. You'll see it has been continuously increasing, and you'll see that we've based the thresholds on 2-year public, 2-year private, 4-year public, 4-year private institutions. And like I said, they've kind of continuously gone up. You'll see a drop in the 2015 to 2016 data. We did some reconfigurations of how we were doing things around that time. We started using specifically IPEDS data, and so that kind of changed the way that we calculated that information. For the Pell Grant recipients, very similar. You'll see that the 2-year private institutions are substantially higher for their thresholds. There aren't a lot of those institutions. I think there's about 82 2-year private institutions that we use in our data set. So who is being served in the Titles 3 and 5 programs? So here's a look at all of our grant, kind of collectively all of our grant programs and where the different demographics tend to fall out. And you'll see here, one of the reasons I wanted to bring this out is to kind of show you what the different institutions are doing and who they're serving for the institutions, the collective institutions of those who are receiving the awards. So specifically for HSI, you'll see that the total number of Hispanic students, for example, in the DHSI program, it's about 3.6 million students in all of the HSI grant recipients are being served. You'll see, and these data are kind of being pulled in relation to the award numbers, in relation to the IPEDS data. And so for the HSI STEM program, it's about 1.2 million. And for POHA, it's about 0.3 million. Again, POHA is a much smaller program. You'll also see, I want to go back real quick. You'll see that for our programs also, you'll notice that the ANAPESI programs also have a high population of Hispanic students who are being served at those institutions. And so collectively, you may know that the HSI and the ANAPESI recipients are sometimes overlapping. And so keeping that in mind, we do have a number of institutions who are receiving an ANAPESI F grant as well as an HSI grant. And so some of your institutions may be submitting grant proposals for ANAPESI and HSI at the same time. And you're not allowed to often receive the HSI and the ANAPESI A grants. And so you would have to make those decisions. And it's just looking at the demographics across these groups. And so here's the number of students who are served by the grant programs. This is alphabetical, and you'll notice that the total number of Hispanic students at the HSI is about 3,600,000, just over that. It's one of the largest populations that we serve. And then, similar the similarities between some of these other grant programs as well, with the totals at the very bottom in terms of the number of students being served, keeping in mind that some of these institutions are receiving grants, multiple sets of these grants kind of across the board. And so for performance reporting, once you receive your grant, your institution has to do those performance reports each year. And they are important for a number of reasons, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But I wanted to talk about how you structure your performance reports and thinking about the work that you do when it comes to submitting for us. And we want to make sure that institutions understand that they need to kind of lay out their performance reports in a certain way. And you need to really make sure that you understand what your grant activities are, what your performance measures are, those types of things as you go through and submit your performance reports on an annual basis. And so the first thing is to think about what your activities are. And these are the intended development, implementation, or restructuring of project, programs, or services. Grant activities may have multiple interconnected objectives designed to increase the success of projects, programs, and services. And an example is, maybe you want to increase the student success in the student supplemental instruction program. And so when you're thinking about the need to increase student success overall, maybe you implement a student supplemental instruction program. How are you going to think about that activity and the objectives that you want to kind of come out of those activities? And so the objective may be the plan to affect change within an activity. Applicants developed objectives within their grant applications with the goal to achieve change within the institution. And there may be multiple project objectives for each grant activity. And again, if you're talking about supplemental instruction, maybe, the example would be to increase student success in doing that through the number of students who are eligible for admission to maybe a secondary grant or secondary program or a major. So maybe they need to get in order to get into the math program. They have to complete pre-calculus and um, uh, calculus and maybe Calc 2 in order to get into the math major. And so maybe you implement this supplemental instruction program to help students succeed in those to increase the ABC rate. And, you want to increase the admission by 10%. And so then you will have your performance measures that are underneath that example. And so a performance measure are going to be the quantitative indicator or statistic or metric used to gauge, for us, it'll be the GEPRA measure or the project or performance measure. And there may be multiple performance measures associated with each of those project objectives. And as I mentioned earlier, maybe it is to increase the number of students eligible for admission into that math major or that math program by 10% by May 31st, 2020. And so, your performance measure may be the number of students passing course 101 or, let's say Calc 2 will increase from 50 to 75 in December of 2019. And then the following, following term, the number of students eligible to take the test to get into the major will increase from 40 to 55. And so that is going to be your performance measure for that year. And so for the second activity, it may be to increase the number of students who are eligible for the admission into the program in level 2 of that by 10% in the following year. And so, you're thinking about your performance measures. It's going to be the number of students who are passing that course will increase from 10 to 12 in December, and maybe passing that test from 20 to 25 in the spring. And so you're going to think about each of those activities, each of those objectives, and each of the performance measures within all of those as you proceed through the process. And so it would look something like this. You're decreasing the time through supplemental instruction, the non-credit course, into introductory college level math and English with a baseline of 1.5 years of non-credit coursework. And so you conduct a 6-week summer bridge program that enrolls 100 students during the initial year. And you have, your goal is 50% of the enrollees will be students from the local school district. 60% of your students who complete all 4 weeks will test at least one level higher in English. 45% of students who will complete all 4 weeks will test at least one level higher in math. 65% of those summer bridge program students will enroll and register in the fall of 2021, and 40% of the summer bridge program enrollees will register and enroll in the spring of 2022. So there are going to be some persistence measures there as well. And so then you would report those data in your annual performance report in kind of that tiered fashion. And so when you're doing your performance report, some of the data quality things that I want to remind folks of when you're submitting those is to really think about what it is that you're entering and to work with your program specialist as you're completing your performance reports. And so, some of the performance reports do have open text fields. And so some of the stuff that we have found that institutions are doing that are kind of messing up their APRs or their final performance report is they're maybe entering excessive text information, for example. You're giving us too much information in one response. It can be very narrow as to what the response is actually asking for. And if you're not sure, ask your program specialist and they'll be able to assist you in that process. Additionally, there's often overlapping text from fields. And so this is where we find institutions are doing things like they're answering question 1, and then they're duplicating some of the information in question 2. And maybe, further down, in another question, you're kind of restating what you've already told us. Again, look specifically at the questions being asked, and you can kind of narrow that information down. And don't feel that you need to kind of extend the information that you're providing to us. Additionally, maybe you're providing incomplete information. You're stating something and then you're not providing the rest of the story for us. Please, complete that information in the answer. And again, if you're not sure, work with your program specialist and they'll be able to assist you in that process. As we are learning more about what institutions are entering into their performance reports, we're going to be providing some additional technical assistance on our website moving forward as well. And so we're going to work on trying to get some of this information entered into the data system so that when you're filling this out, maybe there's some drop-down menus as to what it is that we're providing. So we're going to be working with our program specialist to ensure that that information is being provided in a way that is useful to you all. Further, the objective descriptions, institutions have kind of struggled with some of the objective descriptions. And so what you're going to want to do is, again, work with your program specialist throughout your grant to ensure that those objectives and they're measurable and they're structured properly. And so when you're thinking about, entering these in, go back to your application and tell us what you were going to look at. And if you've made changes to those, make sure that your program specialist knows and that you're working in a way that you're writing those in a way that is appropriate for the work that you're doing. And finally, include descriptions of work that have been completed towards the objectives. Sometimes you have unexpected results, or maybe you have a certain status in your current objective that often does not, meet the being complete, but it's certainly something that you have worked towards, and we need to know what is it that you're doing. And so for that, talk to others that are in your community, as well as at your institution, and they may be able to assist you in finding ways to measure those things or to report on those things that maybe you don't have the full measure quite yet, but you know that it's leading somewhere. And your program specialist, may be able to assist you in ensuring that there is a completion there. And so where do the data go? And so for us, we're looking for institutions, specifically for substantial progress. I think that's the biggest thing that we tend to think about at the department, is that the institution is making substantial progress towards the success and completion of their grant program or their grant project. And so this ensures that a grantee is eligible to continue receiving funds and that it's based on timeliness and accuracy of the work that is completed. For congressional reporting, we get questions all the time about the programs that we're doing, and so they want to know, where the funds are going and how they're being spent. And, often, I know you all know about the legislatively allowed activities. And so when you're doing your performance reports, you're putting in there information about your LAA and what it is that you're doing and how it fits into one of those legislatively allowed activities. And often we'll get questions from Congress, how are the HSI spending money on, tutoring programs? And so we're able to pull data from your APRs to take a look at that. And we do get those requests quite frequently. Additionally, stakeholder requests. Lots of times it's dissertation research or organization research. So a lot of the organizations are, trying to determine, how institutions are improving enrollment, using HSI funds or other things. And it's also efforts to kind of improve the programs or get further funding. So, some of these stakeholders are trying to get additional funds for the HSI programs, and a lot of the organizations are allowed to do that. And so they want to know, what is it that the institutions are doing, and, how can we be of service, and what data are being collected already. And so, they'll do a FOIA request and we'll provide those data to them. And then finally, the GEPRA reports. And so we have to report to OMB, what the progress is of the grant programs that are receiving funds. And so we provide that information directly to OMB based on specifically, how the institution is doing. And so we get those data actually through iPads to do some of those reports. And so we submit that information through OMB in our budget service office directly to the data.gov information and max.gov. So, and I believe that is the final slide. And so I'll open it up to questions, I think, or I'm going to let Margarita, she may have a couple questions, and I'll be able to stick around to the end now, Margarita.
That's great, Jason. Thank you. So there's one question here in the chat that I'd like to share with you. Will the section of the APR tying institutional costs to LAA categories be adjusted? Quite a few of our expenses are not well aligned with the LAA category options, so it is difficult to match those up accurately.
So if I'm understanding correctly, I want to make sure, are you saying that none of your activities are fitting into the LAA categories, or are you saying it just you're doing a lot of stuff that's in that other category and you're institutionalizing those other activities first?
So Alicia, this was your question, so would you like to expand on it?
Sure. Basically, there's just some things in the LAA categories that our stuff just doesn't match up. It's like, I know, like programs, how much money we spent on starting a new major, that's just not in there. So I really had to struggle to make it fit. And I felt like I was saying that I spent money on an LAA category that in my mind, I really wasn't.
Sure. So I would recommend working with your program specialist on some of those, because my guess is that you may some of the stuff may fit into some of those categories and you just haven't thought about how they do them, because they're typically fairly broad categories. And the LAAs, for us, those are they're legislatively allowed. So we can't really make any changes on those. They are what they are. There's some of them that I've been wanting to change, but unfortunately, we have to wait for HEA reauthorization. And so my recommendation is to work with your program specialist to kind of ensure that that the work that you're doing fits in some of the LAAs as best you can. And I would probably say, like, if you've got new majors, for example, I've not 100% certain on the programs, LAAs, because there's so many of them. They should be able to fit somewhere, and your program specialist can probably guide you. I see another question in here about when is the due date for the IPR. So for new grantees who are just starting this year, the due date, it'll open beginning of April, close at the end of April. It's about a 30-day window for the IPR. And that is using the 524B form. And so that should open, whoever's going to be in charge of the APR next year will probably provide that date, those dates for you. But it should be the beginning of April and typically end of April or beginning of May, depending on Fridays and weekends and all that stuff.
Jason, since I don't see any other questions in the chat, and before we move on to Josh, I'd like to ask you to share your thoughts on one issue that comes up quite a bit, and it's any advice that you would have for project directors working with their institutional research office or their enrollment office in managing their data and being aware of all the data issues, because especially when it comes to like the eligibility data and what's being done with all of those stats, there seems to be a disconnect between the project directors who are managing our projects and the folks who are like crunching the numbers at the IHEs, and it causes confusion on a whole bunch of different levels.
Yeah, so, I talk about eligibility as being the first step for the institution to break down the barriers or the silos that are often on your campus. You need to be thinking about eligibility as kind of your pre-application for any of these grants. And the reason I say that is it gives you an opportunity for folks to kind of work across your institution to collect the data that are necessary. And a lot of times the eligibility process is completed by your financial aid office. It could be done by your sponsor programs office or your institutional research office. And these are all things that really everybody should be at the table when it comes to developing the application, especially if you have to do any of the waiver requests. And the reason I say that is often those waiver requests have things like demographics or information regarding needy students or expenditures at your institutions. And so this is where you really start to think about your institution's breakdowns in terms of what it is that you need and where you want to go. And so once an institution submits the eligibility information, then you really start thinking about specifics in terms of the grant application. And the grant application needs to start with your logic model. What is it that you want to do and how do you want to do it? And you start to think about your institution from the perspective of the SWOT analysis and your strategic plan and bringing those things together for making the changes that you want to see happen. And you can only do that if everybody is at the table. And so when you're developing your grant application, everybody really needs to be in that space. And that includes your institutional research folks, because they're the ones that are going to have the data that are needed for the evaluation piece. And so you want to make sure that when you're bringing folks together to write your application, it may be sponsor programs who's reaching out to say, we're going to submit an application for this. And folks on your campus need to reach out to them and say, great, these are the people that have to be at the table as you're writing this. And so, do your best to make sure that they understand that it is student affairs' responsibility, that it's financial aid enrollment services responsibility, that it's sponsor programs, that it's institutional research, that somebody from academic affairs needs to be at the table, and hopefully at least one or two faculty members, and bring all of those folks to the tables to break down those silos, to analyze your strategic plan, where you want to go, what your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are, and start building out that logic model to say, these are the changes and this is how we're going to get there. And so that's my recommendation. I know that a lot of campuses struggle when it comes to some of those silos. We talk often about the silo between academic affairs and student affairs. Yes, that exists, but so does the silo between institutional research and sponsor programs and, alumni affairs. All of those folks need to really kind of come together. And, often it's about making sure that they're there at the start. And if they're not, then that's when, now's the time. If you've already got a grant, you need to go to these folks and say, we need to have, a regular meeting so that we understand what it is that we need to collect and what we need to get from institutional research, for example. And, often those data are already there. It's just you may not have asked in the way that they were expecting. And so the research folks sometimes, they're expecting you to ask or answer in a certain way, and that might not be the direction that you actually need to go. And so, when it comes to project directors in these grants, I always recommend that they work with folks across campus, even if they're just implementing a grant that has already been proposed and that has been received. Start building out your community and engage with them now so that you can, be successful moving forwards. And some of they might not even be just on campus. It may be some folks that are off campus as well. And you just need to have a monthly meeting or, bi-monthly meeting, whatever it may be, to ensure that you're getting the information that you need.
Thank you so much, Jason. That was so helpful. So important to have that collaboration, that camaraderie among the different departments on campus and on campus, as you said. So, moving on then to Josh. I'm glad you'll be able to stay, Jason, because I'll open it up to questions to both of you at the end. So, moving on then to Josh, you can begin presenting, and I will let you know as soon as I'm able to see your slide.
Thank you. Let me bring those up. Right, good to go?
I can see it. Thank you, Josh.
Awesome. Okay, well, I will start with, let me just with a review of my talk today. And that's going to be, it's going to be a mix of sharing what data tools we have and what data we have available overall, how to access them. And then in addition to that, I'll provide some demonstrations on how to pull the data yourselves. So please feel free to drop in the chat once we get to that portion some things that you'd like to see. And then lastly, as time allows, some Q&A. But first, let me provide, advance the slides, an overview of NCS. And the National Center for Education Statistics is within the Department of Education's Institute for Education Sciences. In short, our authorizing language requires us to be objective, timely, and useful. So with that said, I want to make sure I thank my OPE colleagues and you, the attendees of this webinar, for your interest in NCS data, because truly the value of the data is when you put it to use, and we're here to make it easier to find. Just a quick overview, we have a couple mandated studies. You may be aware of the Nation's Report Card or the National Assessment for Education Progress. Jason has talked about the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, or IPEDS. My team leads a Condition of Education report, which is a mandated report that we update every year and deliver to Congress and the White House. And another congressionally mandated study, for example, is the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study. NPSAS, as we call it, that one I won't cover too much detail today, but that goal of NPSAS is to understand how students are paying for post-secondary post-secondary education. Our mandating language authorizes us or requires us to collect a wide array of data. So it's really all aspects of education, from early education through career or technical education, adult education, that covers public and private and homeschooling, literacy, revenues, expenditures. So we have a broad array of activities that we conduct. So it's about 50 or so topics and activities in our authorizing language. I'll cover a few studies, as I mentioned today, mostly on how to access iPads data and a few of our other tools. But here is a short review of our data. It's sequenced in a way like almost chronologically in the education journey, from our early childhood longitudinal studies and our National Household of Education Survey, where we capture data on parental family engagement and school choice. And then elementary and secondary education, we have a Common Core data, which I'll review some more. The National Teacher and Principal Survey, where we get data on the background of teachers and race ethnicity of teachers. And then also on the adult side, we have the Program for International Assessment of Adult Competencies, where we're able to measure different skills at the adult level. So when we were drafting this presentation, we had asked for feedback as to how to make this as useful as possible. And one of the feedback were getting some information about local school districts. So I will share with you one of our tools, which is our Elementary Secondary Information System, or ELSI. So what ELSI does, it collects information from several different collections the Department of Education manages and NCS manages. It puts into one tool. The tool allows users to pull information at the national level, at the state level, at the district level, and then all the way down to the school level. So I think it's pretty cool in that you can see very detailed information for maybe the catchment of schools that you're looking to serve, or broader information about your state. So I will start here with a demonstration on how to access some information in ELSI. Let me bring up that. There we go. So I have one table here already set up, but let me go backwards and share how to access it. So as Margarita said, we'll share the slides, and the slides will include links to everything I'm sharing today. But here's an example of the kind of information that you can pull from the Elementary and Secondary Information System, which leverages data from the Common Core of data. And also we have private school data information as well, which is the private school universe survey. So let me begin with a demonstration. You see there's no registration required. Just navigate to the link and specify the unit of analysis here, or the summary level. So I'm going to use district because that was some of the feedback that we received. And I'm going to pull the latest information. The information is updated throughout the year. So right now we don't have the school finance information yet for 22-23 posted here. But if you're looking for it, it's available in other years. But I'm going to just pull the latest information we have available in ELSI. And here is the columns that you can pull from ELSI about a school district. So I'm going to pull from the ELSI the number of charter schools, the number of operational schools, the district website. For characteristics, I'm going to pull the highest grade, lowest grade offered, the highest grade offered. For enrollment, I'm going to pull all students with the exception of adult education. We can come back to adult education. And for race ethnicity, I'm going to pull information for each of the Office of Management and Budget categories for race ethnicity. And there's also teacher and staffing information. So I'm going to pull here the full-time equivalent for teachers in the district, the pupil-teacher ratio. And at the staff level, I'm going to pull total guidance counselors and the school psychologists, just to give a demonstration of what information that ELSI can pull. And then lastly, instead of pulling all of the information that we have available, I'm just going to set this to allow us to do this a little bit more focusing. And I am going to subset this to Nebraska because it's right in the middle, and create table. So what we see here is the name of every local education agency, or those agencies providing the services of a local education agency, which at times that includes charter schools. And we have all of the columns that I had requested for that specific year. Your users can also pull information for multiple years if they're looking to see trends. And that's it. It's pretty straightforward. All the information is there. There is a glossary if you're looking for more detailed information as to how the categories are used. So here we see that lowest grade offered is in code. So pre-K and ungraded, UG means ungraded. And also some other functionality here that I want to highlight, which is the ability to export this as a comma separated value table, an Excel spreadsheet, and also the ability to go back and modify any of the requests pulled. And then lastly, which I think is pretty cool, the ability to save your query. So if you save your query, you can always come back to it. So my query is 651323. So let's say I get out of this and I pull up a different query, but I want to go back to my query 641. And there it is. So that's a quick overview of the elementary and secondary system tool, information system. And I will go back to my presentation and highlight a couple other tools that have information about school districts at the K-12 level. So we also have the American Community Survey Education School District Profiles. While the LC tool, or the Common Core of Data, is information reported by schools, school districts, and state education agencies, the ACS Ed School District Profiles is household data that we tabulate from the Census American Community Survey. It is a 5-year tabulation, so it's, we can call, some call it an average of those 5 years, and it has more the demographic information that schools don't provide that may be complementary, may complement your needs. So here's an example of children in public schools and what languages they speak. My example here is Orange County Public Schools, but we can go through an example together. So you would drop in here the school district. So I'm going to use, let's say, Washington. County in Georgia. So again, this is information pulled from a household survey. So we get a different aspect of the school districts that may be in your catchment, and that information has a household broadband access. It has, as I shared previously, the languages spoken by children in that LEA as reported by households in that LEA, and also educational attainment. And the cool thing here is also they are national comparisons for these estimates. So again, sorry, not to scroll too fast. Here's the educational attainment for parents of children in public schools for this specific LEA. And then here are national comparisons for select characteristics for this school district, and as it compares to the state and national. So this one is medium income. Here is a bachelor's degree or higher. And here are other key statistics that allow users to compare across their district of interest and to the state and national estimates. So that is a tool for K-12. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about integrated post-secondary education data systems, or IPEDS. As Jason mentioned, we have many different use cases for IPEDS throughout the Department of Education. I'm going to try to focus in on what I think you may find useful as you work on your programs. So just a quick overview of IPEDS. It's collected annually by the National Center of Education Statistics. Data is collected by all post-secondary institutions that are eligible to participate in Title IV federal financial aid programs. Provides basic data needed to describe and analyze trends in post-secondary education in the U.S. and outlying areas. And it's, as I said, it's used by many different providers, and it serves as an input for other studies, for example, the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study. IPEDS is broken into 3 collections. So in the fall, we have institutional characteristics, completions, cost, and 12-month enrollment. In the winter, we have another cost component, We also have student aid for student financial aid, graduation rates, 200% graduation rates, which is, I believe, 6 years, and also admissions and outcome measures. Of these, I want to make sure I highlight outcome measures because outcome measures includes the outcomes for what we call traditional students and also the non-traditional students. So first time, full time is only included in graduation rates, but for outcome measures, we have first time, full time, we have transfer students, and then we also have part-time students. And then in the spring, we collect fall enrollment, finances, human resources, and currently we are collecting academic libraries. These are collected in stages, and they're also released in stages as well. Now, there are several different ways to access IPEDS data. The link here has an overview of what I'm sharing here. Data trends, I'm not going to read from the slide, so I'll just highlight what I think you may find useful. Data trends is a great tool to look at national trends on specific issues like completions, enrollment, financial aid. You can also subset information in data trends by state, but the intent of data trends is not necessarily to look at the institutional level data, it's more to look at the aggregates of the institution's reporting. And then I will highlight today the data feedback report and the summary tables. I'm highlighting the data feedback report because as we mentioned last year, Matt Solner gave a presentation and he said that data feedback report is something that is very useful. And in the comments leading up to this presentation, some of the feedback that we gotten was the ability to compare institutions across different characteristics. And a data feedback report is a really useful tool for that. And the summary tables is another tool that allows us to look at national information, but also drill down on specific institutions if you're interested.
Not right.
Margarita, I see you have your question, a hand up.
Yeah, well, it was related more to the previous slide, but this slide sort of builds on that. So, and so the question is primarily for you, but the more I think about it, Jason may also have some feedback on this, but oftentimes we are approached with a situation where a grantee may say, well, we don't understand the data that's showing for our IHE in IPED. So they think the data may be incomplete or that the data isn't correct or something like that. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the protocols for how this data is transmitted to iPads. And if Jason has like also any insight on what he does, because I know people contact him about the data as well. I know that that's something that comes up all the time. And as a program specialist, like I'm at a loss at how to help people in those situations.
And Jason, feel free to jump in as one of the iPad's power users and also receiving these questions. The short answer is every institution has a key holder. So there is one central point of contact that's in charge of completing iPads. They may pull from many different systems, but there is one person that's usually in the Office of Institutional Research that's completing iPads. The NCS team, together with the Department of Education, works with Title IV institutions throughout the year, providing them training on how to answer iPads or also how to respond to new questions on iPads. That's what we do all year. But the short answer is this is not information that NCS is pulling from, let's say, a database or purchasing from a vendor. This is information that Office of Institutional Research is providing to us. And throughout the year, we're sharing them protocols, including how to fill out the questionnaire, definitions, and we're providing them training on how to provide this information throughout the year. I got the thumbs up from Jason, so that's good. We didn't ever rehearse this, so taking questions live is always is lively.
Awesome. Thank you both. I didn't know that a key holder person existed, so I've definitely learned a really great nugget of knowledge today. Thank you.
Yeah, and anecdotally, I would say it makes perfect sense, right? Because different colleges within a university may have different data sources, and the idea is that we're not going to the admissions department and the registrar. We're going through one key holder, and the key holder has provided training all year to answer these questions. But yeah, good
I'm
question.
sorry, Josh, we have a follow-up question in the chat. It says, can you address strategies for cleaning up the unknown number for race and ethnicity?
Good question.
No, there is one.
Yeah, on our end, we're taking the information that's reported to us, and the institution on their end has the key information as to what data is available. So depending on their systems, it's whether or not they're able to report it. With iPads, in addition to the Office of Management and Budget categories, we also have the additional category regarding non-residents that are attending the institution as well. But the core of iPads is really the institution reporting back to us, and we only have what's able to report from us. My team leads the Digest of Education Statistics, and we've looked at different statistical methods to be able to unpack the unknown data, but we're really looking at the national level so that we can meet our congressional requirements for reporting. And at the institutional level, we're just dependent on what the institutions can actually share back to us. But it's a good question because we've gotten those kind of questions before regarding like 2 or more races as well. Can we provide more granular data? And iPads, to clarify, iPads is reported at an aggregate level. So what we get is a full number that says, here are the number of Hispanic students who got a degree in XYZ. We don't actually have line level data that says, here's Josue de la Rosa, here's everything he's done, and then we aggregate it up on our end. iPads, similar to the Common Core data, is aggregate reported to us. So I've highlighted here 2 data tools, the data feedback report and the summary tables, and I'm going to walk through those. But there are other ways to get data. So the idea is to create different ways to get the data based on different needs. So we have interactive tools, but if you're the kind of user that just wants the full data dump, there are other ways to get this information as well through custom data files where you pick and choose what information you want. Also, you can download the entire Access database. So there's different ways depending on how much interest you want to be able to wrangle the data, or do you want predefined reports for yourself, which is where the interactive tools will be helpful. So I'm going to start with the demonstration. If someone could share with me, well, I have here, geez, as I said, the dangers of live demonstration. I have a data feedback report here that is not working. Fantastic. Let me try this again. So iPads use data and data feedback report. Here we go. So I'm going to pick a institution at University of Central Florida as my example. So users are able to create customized report, but I'm going to use the data feedback report. And I'm going to ask for it in the most recent one as a HTML. So I'm going to zoom in here on the language here, which is how the comparison groups are made. I'm not going to read this, but in short, iPads works to create a list of comparison schools. And as you see in the report will share what a institution is compared to the peer groups that as defined here. So iPads in a data feedback report will have the institution you select and the median of the comparison group that's provided. So here we have the admission measure regarding applied and enrolled. But let me scroll down to what I think, well, here's the makeup of the students. But let me get down to a couple of things, right? I think a little bit more substance. So how the students are enrolled, so full-time fall enrollment counts, and then how the students receive education, so how much the percentage of undergraduates receiving exclusively distance education, and again, the dark red is the unit of the reference institution, in this case is University of Central Florida, against the comparison group. This is finance information. I'm just looking for that one more that I think is a little bit more applicable to your talk. So listen to your talk. You mentioned about students in need and Pell information. So again, here's information about the percentage of students receiving aid, Pell aid in this institution compared to the comparison group. That was for first time part-time, and it's broken out by different groups. So for first time full-time, first time part-time, non-first time full-time, and non-first time part-time. And again, I know that different institutions have different makeups. So this is why I think the outcome measure is very useful. And as it says here, this is from the winter collection from the outcomes measure survey component. This is, yeah.
I'm sorry, Josh, regarding what you're showing us right now, there's a question about what factors should be used for picking the comparison schools.
It's up to whatever you find useful. So I'll give you an example when we talk to superintendents on the K-12 side. Some superintendents said, I am in a state where there's really no comparisons like me in my state, and my actual comparison is another school district in a metropolitan area that's 2 states away. So it's really, do you think that your comparison is a regional comparison, or is your comparison some institution at a different level? So as it shares here, this is the IPEDS teams works with the institution to define the peer groups, and for University of Central Florida, some of it is down the street, down I-4 at University of South Florida, and some of them are almost diagonally across the state at Portland State. The data feedback report allows users to see the predefined comparisons, but with the other tools, users can make their own comparisons as well. So I would say I'm not prescribing how to make the comparison. Instead, the tools give you the flexibility to figure out what do you want to be compared on, and allows you to do so. So you can pick schools around your area, or you can pick schools that, let's say, you only offer this type of program, and the only other school, I'm thinking like aeronautical schools. Aeronautical schools may want to just compare themselves to other schools that have a hyper focus on aeronautical programs, or you may find another measure to do a comparison on. So as I said, the IPEDS team has created several different tools. I will share with you the other tool that I find very useful is the summary tables. So the summary tables, if you're familiar with IPEDS trend generator, well, I'm sorry, you don't have to be familiar with IPEDS trend generator. Let me just show you that. I think we're doing pretty good time. So as I mentioned, IPEDS trend generator is a great tool to look at information over time at a national level. So let's say we wanted to look at how many students were enrolled in institutions in the fall. And you see that we have a time series. And then with the build table, you can do different cuts of the data. So let's say I want to look at by state. And I go back to it, and we see here that it has all the states that you can, but so you want to just focus in on Alabama and Alaska. Let me find a different example to change the question. How many degrees were awarded, and build table, and then I do it by geographic region. So here we can see that in fall 2022, the number of degrees seeking undergraduate students enrolled in post-secondary for the first time was about 2.8 million. And here we see that what those counts look like across different regions. So that's IPED's trend generator. But the cool thing about IPEDS is that we collect the data at the institution level and roll it up, which means because it's at the institution level, you can see something similar to this just for the institution you're interested in. So again, I'm here at the Use IPEDS Data site. And I'm going to the summary table. And I'm going to pick a part of IPEDS that measures. I'm going to look at completions by field of study. So it's giving me the degrees completed by race, ethnicity, and field of study. And on the left-hand side, we have different years to pull it from. But this is the national one. Let's say you just want to look at a specific degree. So I'm going to pull engineering, and it has the ability to drill down even further, but I'm just going to use engineering. So here are all the engineering degrees awarded at the national level by race, ethnicity. And you can, it still has my UCF comparison from before, but you can edit this and to add any other university. All right, South Florida. Oh. So here we go, Florida State. So now I have Florida State instead of UCF, and this is a national, and then this is the Florida State comparison. But this is the aggregate for the entire nation. You can also disaggregate it and see all of the universities. And with the data tool here, you can apply different filters. So I'm going to clear that and go to data tools and actually filters. And by variable, I can also do other comparisons. So if you're interested in looking for a specific university based on a desired demographic or variable, that's also doable as a filter.
Excuse me, Josh, is one of the filters a minor as opposed to a major? Someone's asking about that.
That's a good question. Let me get back to you. I believe we are only capturing the counts by the first majors of completions. I do not know if we're capturing minor information. I do know that we are collecting certificate information as well, but that's a good question, and let me get back to you on that. But here are completions, and then as I mentioned, there are other elements of IPEDS that you can pull data on for all the universities, or filtering on a specific institution that you're looking for. As I showed before, like here, you can add a comparison based on what you may find interesting there. And then again, here are the way to toggle between different years, and the tool also allows to just look at gender or race and gender as well across the different elements in IPEDS. And then lastly, here are some of the predefined report filters. So let's say you were only looking for institutions in Florida. This is the Florida filter for engineering. And then we can also disaggregate this to just show, again, all the institutions, and let me filter that again to just Florida. But so yeah. And I do know this is a lot to share at once. So in addition to having the slides, we have a community to support. We have the iPads team that is here to support the data providers, and we have a dedicated team to answer your questions. So I know that these slides will be online, but if you have a question and you can't think about it now, or you want to follow up with something in the future, we do have a dedicated team that are able to walk you through pulling the data from the tools or help you with the more complicated requests. And they're available via email, they're available via phone, and they're quite responsive. We have the NCS team branch who's able to support you as well. And I'm also adding here our iPads leaders, which are Tara Lawley and Ada, who provide oversight over all of iPads that are also available to help. I want to share a couple other resources that may be helpful. I'll walk through them. As I mentioned, NCS operates the National Nations Report Card, or NAPE. And that has available data not only at the national level, but for select districts where we're interviewing enough schools to participate in NAPE. So we have a data dashboard for the district. If you're familiar with the Digest of Education Statistics, we created a new tool that helps organize information by state. So that is a link to the dashboard. No, I'm not sure how I clicked one link. I got the other one. Whoop. Let me copy and paste that. All right. Okay, sorry. Well, since I'm here, let me show that. NCS is a statistical agency within the Department of Education, but we're not the only collectors of data. So one of the questions we saw were, do you have district level data for graduation? And the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education manages a tool called Ed Data Express. And Ed Data Express has a series of data that complement what NCS has to offer, available through a dashboard and also available through district level downloads. So what this is pulling up now is Title I, Part A participation. Should have mentioned we've had some internet issues here at the department, so I'm not sure this is going to actually work, but you just have to trust me that the dashboard has this kind of information. And then also you can drill down and get detailed data as it's available. So as it's available depends on the authorizing language and the need to collect the data, but sometimes we have data at the school level or the district level or the state level, and the data dashboard, data download allows users to pull that information. And then if you have any questions or feedback, there's the email there, which is the eddataexpress@ed.gov. They're a great team. They work very hard to make this data become available. So please feel free to use this dashboard as a complement to iPads and any other tools you may be looking to use. And I would just highlight the state dashboard. So we have what's been termed a fire hose of data. And to help make it easier to find, we created the Digest State Dashboard. And if you're a user of the Digest of Education Statistics, you know that information is spread out across multiple tables. And what we've done here is collect the data and present it at the state level. So for some of the key information like graduation rates or post-secondary enrollment, or on the K-12 side, teacher student characteristics, we have trend data over time. And we have this for all of the states, including the outlying areas like Puerto Rico, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. In addition to that, the state dashboard provides links to other state level information. So for example, the NATE state profile, the National Teacher and Principal Survey state profile, and then also the PX skills map state profile as well. And I will, I will highlight a couple more things here in our presentation, which includes the HSI tabulations. As I mentioned, my team leads the Digest of Education Statistics. And one of the products we produce is a national summary of Hispanic serving institutions. So what we're doing is we're taking the information that Jason makes available regarding who's eligible to participate, to be an HSI, and then we're marrying that with iPads data to provide some key statistics regarding enrollment. So here we have organized by state each of the institutions that we were able to merge with iPads, and then some of the key statistics as we have available for each of these institutions. So that ends the formal part of my talk. I've covered HSI tabulations, a few of the iPads tools, and a few of the K-12 tools. Again, we're here to be a service to you so that you can do the good work that you're doing. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, but I hope that this provided at least a good introduction to the data that we have available. And then I will turn it over to Margarita for next steps.
Thank you so much, Josh and Jason. If you wouldn't mind coming back on camera as well, if you could, to take any last questions. I am just so excited and so thrilled for this webinar. I realize now I should have probably scheduled it for 2 hours, and I know that we're right against time. So if anyone has to go, just know that we're recording this. There were a couple of other questions in the chat that if we have time, maybe you could answer, or, for as long as you all can stay. Some of these, we've had like different versions of it so far, but, we talked about the data that's reported to iPads that, that's how we determine eligibility. So there's been some discussion back and forth in the chat about, is data verification done? Does the department just accept the data that's sent to us? How do we know that it's accurate? I think you all talked to this a little bit more, but is there anything else about data accuracy that maybe either of you could share with our grantees?
I will drop in the chat the guidance that we share with those reporting data. But as I mentioned, it's more of a suite of tools, from providing them information on how to answer the question in a way that is interoperable or comparable across institutions. And then on our end, we're also doing logical checks to make sure that the information provided from the information that we have seems within the bounds that we're expecting. But ultimately, the offices of institutional researchers are the key informants, and what we're doing is we're collecting information that they are making available.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And Josh, what you just described, that's mostly something that's provided to that key holder individual that you mentioned?
Correct.
Okay.
They're the central point of contact, but many of this information is available. I know one of the questions we had was about like the glossary. So you can actually see the glossary and the form that the institutions are filling out. So you can see like the exact context of how these questions are asked.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I know that on the recently approved new APR form, Jason provided a lot of guidance and direction on like the new definitions that are being used for those iPads terms, and people really need to pay attention to that. Jason, I don't know if you wanted to say anything specifically about that, because people got very confused about that during this last cycle, especially reporting like graduation and retention year over year. Also, like with respect to undergraduate and graduate, folks would just seemed very confused about that.
Yeah. So, we're doing our best to try to improve the APR. We are currently conducting an analysis of the annual performance report in terms of like data quality, what people are reporting on their performance reports and that type of stuff. And so that report is forthcoming. It'll probably be out sometime next year. And so when it comes to the information that you're reporting, the best thing that I recommend is taking a look at the iPad's glossary. That is, we want to standardize kind of across the department what it is that we're collecting and why we're collecting it and how we're collecting it. And the best recommendation I have is to pull that up and download it, have it on your desktop, so that you can take a look at it and, refer back to it, both for your performance reports as well as for other things that you're doing. And, that glossary, it will change, iPads and IES, they change their definitions as they need to, and that's going to be changing over the next few years as well. So just be on the lookout for that information. in the glossary, and that will certainly help. When it comes to things like graduation rates and persistence, we want to be as consistent as possible, kind of across the department, for our programs, for iPads and IES, for reports that you all are doing, so that there is a standard as to what it is that we're looking at. And so those things will help you all, as well as help any reports that we do in the future.
Thank you, Jason. There was a related question about this, just going up a little bit more. So one of the question was, is the data for the 4-year programs, is the data for the graduate programs as rigorous or complete as for the 4 years? I can't find that question now, but it was something to that effect. Any thoughts on that particular issue?
Can you repeat that, Margarita?
Yeah, I'm trying to find oh, here we go. It was from Volker, and Volker, you can expand on this if I'm not explaining it correctly, but he says here, is the data on graduate enrollments and programs as robust on iPads as they are for I think he meant here 4-year colleges?
Yeah, I think what he's asking is, kind of when it comes to reporting data to iPads, to us, to whatever it may be, again, it goes back to that standardization kind of across the programs. And so, it all of it is going to be rigorous. It's all, we're all trying to, to collect the same types of data as best we can, kind of across things. And, my assumption is iPads is going to do the same thing. So the definitions are the same for each of the institutions. And if you go into iPads, even just on search for a college, that information should be standardized. You should be able to, if you're looking at enrollment at each institution, those enrollment numbers should be the same regardless of the institution type. It should, even if it's for profit, if it's not for profit, we do want a standard reports kind of across the department.
Okay.
Can I chime in quickly? This is Volker. Sorry.
Yes, of course.
So I was trying to sort of follow you guys a little bit and try something myself there in the data and look for data specifically on graduate programs. And I know from experience that in the CSU has a very well developed data dashboard for itself. But when it comes to graduate student data, it always falls apart. And I would conclude then that whatever data you receive is equally incomplete when it comes to grad students and grad programs. And I just wonder whether in your experience, looking at this data, let's say for points of comparison, does it work as well when you try to do this for graduate programs as it does for 4-year colleges or K-12?
So I will share what I put in the chat, which is there are some elements that are institutional characteristics that they are just collected about the institution, right? Is it private? Is it public? And it's just it's an entry. But things like number of degrees awarded by main concentration, we can disaggregate that by degree level. So my team often reports the number of Hispanic students who received a master's degree in engineering, but that's also can be done at the bachelor's or associate's level or the doctorate level as well. So I put in the chat from the summary tables the ability that you can filter the completions by the different award levels.
Thank you both for that response. And just one final question. There are actually 2 related questions regarding the race ethnicity category. So there's a question here about whether iPads is going to be adding MENA, which I believe is Middle East, North Africa, based on what census has added, as well as just some related questions about any additional race or ethnicity categories that will be added, including for students who may identify as more than one race or ethnicity. And then with that question, I think we'll wrap it up because it's 3:40.
Well, we ran out of time, so I won't answer it. So I'm just kidding. I would say twofold. One, the race ethnicity standards, as Jason mentioned, like standards across the board are there to make it inoperable across collections. And the race ethnicity standards is actually owned by the Office of Management and Budget. So what applies to the census also applies to us, also applies to the National Center of Health Statistics. And what we call Statistical Policy Directive 15 also applies to all data collections, not just statistical data collections that involve race ethnicity. So yes, because you saw that the new standards treats the new category Middle Eastern North African as another required category, that will be rolled into IPEDS. Now, when we roll into IPEDS, I will say stay tuned. The team is actively working with the institutions to figure out the feasibility of collecting and reporting this information in a useful manner, and more information is coming down the road. Please, follow us on our website and our blogs and our email alert, and we'll be certainly in touch with our colleagues at the Office of Post-Secondary Education. But yes, it's the same standard for all federal data collections, and we're actively working in the process of how to feasibly implement those new standards.
Thank you, Josh. Jason, were you gonna add something?
I was just going to say, it's those changes will also impact us, and so we don't know how, and so those conversations are also happening. It's just kind of across the board. So again, just kind of stay tuned. We will know more at some point, and it's not just going to be eligibility and those types of things. It's going to be across the board with OPE. So we'll standardize as we need to.
Excellent. So thank you all so much again. I just can't express how excited I was for this. The presentations exceeded my expectations. I don't know, I'm a little bit of a data nerd, but I just love all this stuff, and we really did try to design the webinar to answer all the questions that we're getting all the time once we have our in-house experts here. So again, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Josh. I think we've run out of time, so we will post this. We will send out the PowerPoints and come back next week to hear from Jonathan Jacobson from the What Works Clearinghouse on evaluation, planning, and design. So again, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Josh, and thank you all for being here. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.